With this video, I will begin revealing mysteries in Bible end time prophecy. This is going to be the first video, and the topic is COVID-19 Pandemia in Matthew chapter 24, King James Version. Part 1. Today we are in Matthew chapter 24, verse 12. Matthew chapter 24 has a prophecy directly referring to the COVID-19 pandemia, speaking of it more as in its consequences in human behavior, rather than actually calling it out as a pestilence. This post is not to be understood as a guideline on prevention from COVID-19 infection or any other infection. Matthew chapter 24, King James Version, verse 6. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Notice in verse 7, pestilences. Pestilences could be anything from HIV, Ebola, COVID-19, and dozens of other infections that have killed millions in this final generation of the end days. Verse 6. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And then, verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Pestilences is written after, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines. Pestilences is after famines, as if it would speak of a generation that begins with wars and rumors of wars. And then we see written also in verse 6, see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. If this generation began in 1948 with the birth of the nation of Israel after World War II, that then ended with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by which bombing the world witnessed for the first time the use of a whole new weapon, a weapon that could destroy the world, then that, see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet, in verse 6, could be referencing the Cold War and its arms race that brought Russia and the United States building nuclear weapons at an alarming rate and in numbers, that if there were ever to be a conflict between these two nations, it would become the end of the world, with both superpowers engaging in their mutual destruction through thousands of nuclear weapons that will be built and placed in their satellite nations. The most common fear in all the Cold War era was that sooner or later a nuclear war would start that would trigger the end of all humanity, with the minutes and hours leaving the world lifeless. This is what I believe is that, see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet, in verse 6. The end, not through the Cold War, and neither that of any man-made direct cause, as in the sense of the danger of a nuclear war that would wipe out all humanity, independent of the will of God. The end will not come in verse 6 and 7, but further on in the future. and not from what is happening in verse 6 and 7. Verse 7, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Famines. After the Cold War ended, ever more increasing attention was to other issues. In fact, issues like overpopulation, deforestation, and ever increasing desertification, climate change, pollution became the main problems worldwide. Though there were wars, the main world's focus was more in matters regarding the health of our planet and its people, and what would become the effects on health of human activity through the increasing use of natural resources. So that famine coming after, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, written as written, could refer to some order of troubles affecting this final generation. Pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Verse 7, pestilences, coming after famines, as if in verse 7 of this generation, the main world issue is the presence of pestilence that has become the main attention and focus on global level. That pestilences could also be interpreted as global pandemia. And finally, verse 7 ends with earthquakes in diverse places. The world and civilization has witnessed earthquakes for thousands of years, so it's no surprise to have a generation of earthquakes. Find me a generation without earthquakes. But that earthquakes are written in verse 7 in this final generation would mean that these are not just minor tremors, or that of earthquakes of 4 or 5 Richter quakes that cause damage and lives, but not on a level to reduce a city and nation in misery. In the last 20 years, we have witnessed what would appear as an increase of earthquakes, with some up to 7 Richter. Though scientists do not agree that there has been an increase of earthquakes year by year, they do agree that even though the numbers of earthquakes worldwide has not significantly changed in the average of numbers of earthquakes, they do agree though that there has been an increase in their destructive effects, with earthquakes of 6-7 Richter increasing almost year by year. A generation that begins with kingdoms and nations in war, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes that are commonplace, and everyone is in somehow affected politically, ideologically, socially, psychologically, spiritually, and economically. A generation where the coldness of heart is affecting everyone. A generation that is continuously under stress, where depression, heart disease, and cancer are the main cause of death. And finally, this other great tragedy, the COVID-19 pandemia. The COVID-19 pandemia, if not stopped soon, will bring down entire nations and superpowers in their economies. Unemployment worldwide, poverty, and famines unseen in history, in biblical proportions. Religions coming down, religious extremism following and on the rise. Verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. This is the end of part 1. There will be another 2 parts. Thank you.